Hello my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where people follow orders to spite someone. And in today's episode, it's all about horrible Karen teachers, guys, getting taught lessons they won't forget. And OP gets a smug Karen teacher fired by obeying her exact orders. It's hilarious. So if you've ever had a horrible teacher, this one's for you. I hope you enjoy the stories. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. Before we begin, I just want to say that I've always had really rotten luck with roommates. While in college and working full-time, I went through several in an apartment where my landlord picked the roommates and was nice enough to let me meet them. The summer of my last semester, I was taking an intense Spanish course. I was struggling, as the professor thought immersion Spanish for an 11-week summer course was a good idea. I basically spent every Saturday that summer with a classmate at the library, teaching ourselves Spanish because we didn't understand a damn word that was said in class. The teacher also wouldn't allow us to speak English in class. So one night, 10 minutes before class, I get a call from a strange number. It's my downstairs neighbor telling me the horrible news that my roommate was dead. She had died from a brain aneurysm. She had just moved in a week before, and I didn't know her very well, but I was obviously shocked and saddened. So I walked into class and tried to talk to the teacher, but the teacher refused to let me speak in English. She said to me, "Español, por favor." She then told me to say it to the class in Spanish. But honestly, I didn't know the words to explain that my roommate had just died and I needed to go home. I was super angry at this point, so I decided to comply. I just sat there for 30 minutes with my Spanish-English dictionary and I wrote 2 paragraphs explaining the situation. At the very end, I included, "And I think you're a bitch. How dare you force me to say this to the class? I'm reporting this to the school and I hope you're fired." I then raised my hand, told her I was ready, and then read it out loud to the class. The teacher's face turned pale. Students started whispering, saying, "What did she say? Her roommate died and the teacher made her say it in Spanish? What?" I then began to gather my belongings, and one guy in particular stood up and he gathered his stuff too. He then turned to the teacher and in perfect Spanish, he told the teacher that he was going to drive me home and that he would be complaining about this too. We had finals a few days later and filled out those stupid questionnaires afterwards about the teacher, and everyone in the class blasted her. Never mind that I turned in a formal complaint. I ended up with a B, and that was her last semester teaching. Yeah, you can tell by her reaction that she regretted that big time. And if I were in OP's shoes, I wouldn't have wasted any time at all translating paragraphs on a piece of paper. If I was in that situation, I would have said out loud right then and there in English what I needed to say, and then just walked out. And guys, the teacher was also kind of a jerk to make OP say whatever they needed to say out loud to the class in Spanish though, right? Like, what if it was something private that shouldn't have been shared to the class? So I forgot all about this story until I was recently talking to friends about grade school smartasses, and my memory was jarred. Now, this is a story that I'm not proud of, as I'm now a teacher, and if I had a student behave the way my rotten ass did in this story, I would probably pull my hair out, but it fits this sub, so here we go. So in the 6th grade, my class got a new science teacher. We'll call her Miss Mac. Now, Miss Mac was this young, fresh out of college teacher who probably thought it was a smart idea to rule with an iron fist, so she would earn respect and obedience. The problem was that she would go out of her way to nitpick every single thing we did, and she enacted much harsher punishments than we deserved. She would set ridiculous rules, like not letting anyone use the bathroom more than 3 times a year during her class, or giving us Saturday detention if we forgot our homework. Even now, I don't think she treated us fair, but as a moody, obnoxious 12-year-old, I was quite livid and actively tried to think of ways to punish her. I was always an excellent student who got excellent grades. However, a common theme throughout my parent-teacher meetings was my talkative nature. This often led to many trips to the front office in grade school, so I was pretty familiar with all the admins who adored me. My talkative nature did not bother them at all. I know it must have been exhausting for teachers, but Miss Mac took a strong dislike to me immediately because of it. She would move me every single day to sit at the back of the classroom alone. If I said a single word to anyone during class, no exceptions, even if it was to speak about the work. If we had to be in labs that day and in work groups, I would be forced to work alone. It really sucked. So one day, it's about 10 minutes into class, and somehow I hadn't been moved out of my seat yet. I was hopeful for the day, until the person behind me dropped their pencil. The pencil rolled under my feet, so I picked it up and handed it back. They said thank you, and I said you're welcome, and that was it. Before I could even turn back to the front, Miss Mac suddenly screams at me saying, "Damn it, why can't you control yourself? What's the matter with you? Get to the back and don't you dare say another word for the rest of my class. I mean it." Of course, I tried to defend myself, as did the rest of the class, but she refused to hear it. So I moved, and I sat livid, staring daggers into her. I decided from that moment on that I would follow exactly what she said. I would never say another word in her class. Not to her, not to my classmates, not to anyone. From the minute I enter her classroom until the minute I left, I was absolutely silent. And to be honest, regardless of me ignoring her the few times she directly addressed me, I'm sure she probably enjoyed the first 2 weeks or so of silence. This all came to a head, however, when Miss Mac had one of her monthly administrative reviews, which just so happened to coincide with my class that day. At some point during the class, Miss Mac was showing off for the admin at the back of the classroom, and she randomly starts calling students for a review game. Now, she must have been in her groove or something, because clearly she forgot about the ongoing situation between us, and she calls on me to answer one of her questions. When she did, I just sat there, complete silence, staring directly into her eyes. She then asked again, and I know it took everything in her to not lose it on me when I just smirked. She definitely couldn't lose her cool in front of the admin, so I knew she wasn't gonna yell at me like before. I was really enjoying this moment. I was watching the gears turn behind her eyes, knowing that she could either keep trying to challenge me and make herself look bad, or she could ignore my disobedience and make herself look bad. She chose the latter. Well, the admin was not as willing to ignore my blatant insubordination, so she walked up behind me and she leaned over and asked in a whisper if everything was okay. I just turned and I looked at her and I nodded. She then whispered, "Then why aren't you answering, Miss Mac?" That's when I turned back to my teacher. I looked her right in the eyes as I said at full volume, "Miss Mac told me last month that I was never allowed to speak another word in her class ever again." And I wish I could have gotten her face on camera. Hers and the admin's, if I'm being honest. They were both such a lovely mix of shock and distaste. Unfortunately, I didn't get to hear the things that were said when the admin pulls Miss Mac into the hallway, but her beet red face upon her return to class was enough to fuel my imagination for years. The admin then took it upon herself to check up on me once a week for the rest of the year. She would stop by during that class, pop her head in, and just look at me expectantly, waiting for me to nod that I was okay. Miss Mac ignored those interactions, but I know they ate away at her, and never once did she say another word to me about my talking. Oh man, how OP handled that, guys, was frickin' brilliant. And the power a 12-year-old must feel when they get a teacher in trouble, right? And honestly, I would say that power-tripping teacher totally deserved it. Like 3 bathroom breaks per year, detention on Saturdays, if you forget your homework. Some teachers really love to see students suffer, and I'm glad OP stood up against Miss Mac. And if you guys like that one, this person shares their comment. I was in my last year of high school, and back when I was doing school, it was very important that you physically attend class. Back then, I also happened to have severe major depression, and a sister who was not good at getting organized and ready to leave on time. We had this teacher at my school who I always despised. The guy didn't encourage independent thought, and usually spent our 70-minute periods writing on the board for us to copy down, just cycling back, erasing, and writing continuously. No questions allowed until the last 10 minutes. The guy was also notorious for not listening to students, and he had this unspoken rule that he would lock students out of the class for 5 to 10 minutes further when they were late. Let's call him Mr. Richard, for obvious reasons. Well, one morning, I was 5 minutes late to his class. It was first period, due to my sister throwing a tantrum. So I knock on the door, and Mr. Richard said, "Was the bus late?" Apparently that's his only valid excuse for running late to class. I tell him no, but he then says to me, "Then you can't come in." He then shuts the door in my face. Well, after bursting into tears, I decide that his unspoken rule of being left outside the classroom for 5 minutes when one attended late never actually stated that one was required to wait outside the door to enter the room when he decided to let the student in. So with that, I wander off to the library to find something interesting to read. Apparently, after he opened the door and found me missing, the school had to call my parents and explained they'd misplaced me and why. I was eventually found, and Mr. Richard had the nerve to ask in front of my parents and the principal why A, I hadn't told him the reason I was late, because he didn't let me say so, and B, why didn't you wait outside the door? Because you also didn't say so, and I wasn't gonna waste my valuable learning time that my parents pay for standing and staring at a door. My parents end up ripping them a new one, and Mr. Richard did not lock anyone out of his classroom ever again. It gave me great pleasure to get one up on such a hard-headed, infuriating teacher. So my best friend loves every time I tell this story, so I thought I would share with all of you. In high school, I had this English teacher who was very opinionated in her grading. If she loved a book, the whole class had to read it. And if you didn't get a good grade on your report when you turned it in. I was an avid reader, reading anything and everything, so let's just say I wasn't a fan of her selections. She was also the kind of teacher that thought her class was the most important one you had. Due to this, the workload was quite substantial. Coming up on our final exam, she gave the class a talk 1 week before the final. She explained that she would be weighing our grade for the semester, giving 60% of it to the final. She then explained how she was preparing us for college. However, since she was giving so much weight to the final, she would also give us an opportunity to earn extra credit. For every 4 lines of the epic poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, you could memorize and write verbatim on the back of the test, you would receive 1 point of extra credit. Now, I've had a rough year due to her grading style, so I was getting a B in the class at the time. However, this was my moment to shine. I have a knack for remembering things, and this opportunity seemed made for me, and I wasn't going to let it pass by. I got home and I looked up the poem. It was well over 400 lines, and I got to work memorizing. The final exam finally came, and I sat down confidently in my seat, and I eagerly waited to receive the test. We received our 15-page final, and we were told we had 3.5 hours to complete it. So I put my name at the top, and I immediately flipped it over to the back, ignoring all the test questions. I then ravenously wrote out 400 straight lines from the epic poem verbatim. That step complete, I decide to look at the questions she intended us to answer. It was filled with multiple choice, essays, fill-in-the-blank questions, all that stuff. I took a few minutes to fill in the blanks I knew, and I guessed at multiple choice ones I didn't know, and completely ignored her essays. Now for the fun part. After not even halfway into the 3.5-hour final, I walked triumphantly to the teacher's desk. I then flipped the test on her desk and said, "Have a great summer." The teacher looks at me and says, "Very funny. It's a 3.5-hour final. Now sit down and finish your test." I responded, "No, I'm finished. I got well over 100%. That's when she said, "Let me see your paper." She then looked through my test. She saw the empty essays and empty fill-in-the-blanks. Now even more annoyed with me, she said, "You haven't answered half of these. It's a 3.5-hour test, so sit down and finish it." I wouldn't be denied, so I say to her, "No, I'm finished. I got over 100%. At this point, teacher's getting very upset, and the color in her face is starting to shift. She then says to me, "How do you think you have over 100% when you haven't even done half the test?" And with a big smile I said, "Look at the back. You said for every 4 lines of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner we memorized and wrote on the back, you would give us 1 point of extra credit. You will notice that I've written 400 lines from the poem. By my math, that equals 100% of extra credit. Anything I answered in this nonsense is gravy, so I got over 100%. The teacher then turns beet red. Her knuckles were white holding my paper. She just stared at me with hate in her eyes. And I said again, "Have a great summer," as I walked out. I got an A in the class. She actually did what she said, and my final was 145% out of 100. That was freaking beautiful what OP did, guys, and what a compliance that was. And you know what, you gotta give props to that teacher for not going back on her word and realizing she messed up big time. Because you know a lot of teachers out there would have been like, nah, we're not letting that go. Absolutely brilliant play on OP's part. The school I go to is very well respected in my country, so it's not uncommon for venues to request to display a student's work, or ask for students to sing live for them. On the occasion in question, the largest art gallery in the country had asked my school to submit inspired art to be out on display. The school agreed and said they would submit 5 pieces of work. Now, I hated art growing up, but it was a mandatory subject until you got to choose your subjects in year 10. Needless to say, I dropped the subject as soon as possible. Despite hating the subject, I still put effort into my work, and some of it wasn't that bad. However, at the same time, I would not hide away from expressing my views when we were given a task that I didn't see the point to, even if the teacher was in earshot. Needless to say, my relationship with the art department faculty wasn't the best. My teacher at the time particularly had it in for me. He was one of those teachers that has a view that their subject should be your most important subject, regardless of your future ambitions. If he thought that you weren't prioritizing art, then he would make your life hell. Again, I hated art as a subject, and he knew this, but I would still do any work set to the best of my ability. With that said, we had just finished a project where we had to mix different pigments to create our own unique color. Being colorblind, I struggled a lot as I literally could not differentiate between half the pigments. I gave it my all, but ended up giving up halfway through the project. My teacher hated me for giving up. In his defense, he tried to make it as easy as possible for me, but I hated the subject and I saw a way out, so I took it. My teacher was beyond mad. When we went to hand the project in, he gave me a lecture how I need to put in more effort and work harder because the quality of work was unacceptable. Remember, I literally could not see half the project. Once that project was finished though, my teacher told us Gallery X had asked that we create some inspired art. We were basically shown 5 different paintings that we were supposed to recreate in our own way. There was a big fuss about this. People were saying that art schools would be giving out scholarships, and that there was a $10,000 reward and other nonsense that 14-year-olds make up. But nevertheless, everyone wanted to have their painting in Gallery X. So for the next month and a half in my art classes, we would work on our piece. After the first week of working on my piece, the excitement of the project wore off. So did my eagerness in lessons. My teacher noticed this, and he went from complimenting my work to yelling at me about what I was doing wrong. By the 4th week, I was so over the project and just wanted to be done with this. With 2 weeks left on the project, my teacher pulls me aside to tell me that my work isn't good enough and I need to improve it. I tried to improve, but he kept on belittling me. So out of arrogance and spite, I made art my most important subject until the end of the project. I dragged myself to each lesson, quietly working myself to the bone, counting down the days until the deadline of the project. After what seemed like a year to 14-year-old me, the second last lesson arrives. The lesson was not for final touches or anything like that. My teacher had decided that he should review what each student has done well and where they could improve. He then walks around the classroom, complimenting everyone's work until he gets to mine. I don't remember exactly what he said, but none of it was positive. I do remember, however, how he talked about mine and basically crapped on it in front of everyone. He says out loud to the class, "You can tell that OP hasn't given this any thought and hasn't taken this seriously. This is the result of minimum effort and it shows." And that did sting like a bitch because yes, I had lost interest in it, but I still worked hard in lessons and I gave it my best shot. The bell then went and I sulked out of the class with my tail between my legs. The last lesson finally comes, and I can't wait for it to be over with this stupid project. The lesson was a big one too. The judges from Gallery X were coming to judge all of the work. They come into our class, do all the formalities, and they say stuff like, "These all look so good. I have no idea how we can decide on only one." They then start walking around the room, muttering to each other. The whole class is stood silently at the back, trying to hear what they're saying. They do a full lap of the room, and then walk back over to my spot. I don't even notice them as I tuned out after they looked at the second painting. They then ask the teacher whose work they are stood over, and he looks at them almost in disbelief as he gestures to me. At this point, I snap out of my daydream and I just smile politely with no idea what's going on. The judges then confer for a while my teacher and I frantically try to figure out what's going on. Finally, after 5 minutes of mumbling, they say they want to shortlist it to potentially be shown in Gallery X. I look at them in shock and then again smile politely and say thank you. I can't begin to describe the look on my teacher's face. I don't think I could have seen anyone more confused, angry, and disappointed all at the same time. My teacher then begrudgingly thanks the judges and walks them to the door. He thanks them again as they leave and stumbles back to his classroom. He doesn't even congratulate me on my work. He just says, "Good work, everyone, and as a reward, I'll put on this documentary for you to watch." And he did just that, not saying another thing until the end of the class. Later on that week, I get this email from Gallery X asking for my permission to display my artwork, of which I happily said yes to. So to sum it up, the work that he disrespected and said I put no effort into was selected from 192 others. It got featured in the biggest art gallery in the country. When this took place, I was in high school, and due to a certain virus, we had Zoom meetings almost every class. For online school, I disliked it, especially having to have our cameras on. I get super self-conscious that anyone in my class could be looking at me and I wouldn't know. A user in the comments pointed out that it could be paranoia, which I think it is. Being paranoid is the best way to describe the feeling. My teacher, who we'll call Miss Stevens, was super extroverted and she loves to see her students. Now this is all fine and dandy, but she obsesses over it. She yells at kids all the time for not having their cameras on, as she wants to see you participating in class. After a while, she got fed up with people ignoring her demands, so she starts docking points for the day's assignments if you didn't have your camera on. One class, I had joined a meeting without my camera on, per usual, and I began working on the assignment. She stayed completely silent about my camera for some reason, which I loved for that class. I could work in peace. Later that evening, I get a notification on my phone that I got a 75% on today's assignment. It was a relatively easy assignment that I for sure thought I got 100% on. So I emailed Miss Stevens and I asked if there was a mistake or anything, and she said something along the lines of, "I need to see you participating in the class." And because I couldn't, I felt it was necessary to deduct 25% from your assignment. I just told her I didn't feel comfortable turning my camera on, which I feel is totally reasonable. She then gave me a hard no and said, "No one's watching you in class. They're watching me because I'm the teacher. You'll get used to it eventually." Hearing that, I was pissed. Like, all I want is a little bit of privacy. And sure, not all kids stare, but we all have moments where we get lost staring. So I decide that I would turn my camera on, but I wanted her to regret it. I downloaded a super glitchy, flashy, bright, and disgusting glitch effect that I could put over my camera using a plugin that I found online. I could add whatever I wanted. So the next day, I show up for the meeting and I turn my camera on. A few minutes into the lesson, I turn on the glitch effect and I lower the frame rate of my camera to make it look like I was lagging. Miss Stevens then asked what's happening, so I replied, "I think my Wi-Fi is being slow or something." She then moved on in the lesson, but you could tell that she was starting to get annoyed by this constant flashing on her screen while she was talking. There isn't enough kids in the class for her to simply put me on another page, and I don't think she knows how to turn my camera off herself. I then began enjoying seeing her reaction, so after I finished my assignment, I started messing around with it a little. I start flashing random things on my camera, like pictures of Shrek, memes, whatever came to my mind pretty much. She then pulled me aside after class, and she lectured me on how having my camera on like that was distracting her. I just said, "You wanted me to turn my camera on, so I did. You never told me what I had to have on my camera." She then rolled her eyes a little and just gave in. She also emailed my parents about me being distracting, and when I showed the plugin to my parents, they found it hilarious and they didn't care that much. Oh, those good old days of online Zoom classes, guys. Like, on one hand, I do agree that the teacher should be able to see students while lecturing to make sure they're paying attention and doing the work, but taking 25% off the assignment is a little bit too much, don't you think? With that said, let me know though guys, if you agree or disagree with what OP did, because a lot of people are saying the teacher did not deserve this, as she was just trying to do her job. And also, newsflash OP, when you're present in the classroom, anyone can look at you anytime. So yeah, again, we're over that, past it, thank frickin' goodness. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed yesterday's episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled People episode, where a psycho Karen tries to hijack a wedding, and it goes completely wrong, guys. Go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.